I've been on 1,000 flights. Literally 1,000. It's something that just comes with the territory when you're me. My name is Donald Trump, and I know what it's like to travel. People watch you. They take pictures. It's expected. But there's one thing I never expected on this particular flight. Something that made everything feel like it was spinning out of control from the very first step. I walked up to the gate, checking my watch. I was running a little behind, but it wasn't anything I hadn't handled before. I'm used to tight schedules. The airline staff greeted me with the usual polite nods and smiles. I felt the eyes on me as always, and I didn't mind. That's part of it. Part of being a public figure. I walked toward the gate, a couple of people recognizing me as I passed. A small, somewhat loud voice spoke up. "Excuse me, Mr. Trump." It came from a woman standing behind the counter, holding a clipboard. She looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. It wasn't excitement, not admiration. It wasn't even respect. It was something else, something colder. "Yeah, I'm Donald Trump. First class," I said, giving my usual charming smile. But her response wasn't what I was expecting. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not allowed on this flight." I thought I misheard her. She must have been talking to someone else. But no, she was looking directly at me. My stomach dropped. My first thought was that it was some kind of joke or a mistake. Surely, there was a misunderstanding. "I don't think you understand," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm Donald Trump. This is my flight. I'm here to board. First class." She didn't even blink. Her eyes were firm, unyielding. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Trump, but you're not flying today." I stood there, trying to process what was happening. Was this some kind of prank? Maybe it was a miscommunication. I glanced at the small crowd of people behind me. Some were looking at me with curiosity, others with something else. It didn't take long before I saw a few phones come out. People were already filming. I took a deep breath. "What's the problem?" I asked. "I've flown with this airline dozens of times. I've never had an issue." She didn't answer me right away. Instead, she just stared. That was when I noticed something. There was a slight shift in her expression. It wasn't just the cool professionalism of an employee doing their job. There was something personal about it, something almost resentful. "Is there a reason for this?" I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she took a small step back. "We don't allow people like you to board." I blinked. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "People like me?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "What do you mean, people like me?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward a man standing by the door. He was watching, his arms crossed, a serious look on his face. Was he security? I could tell the tension was rising in the air. This wasn't just about me being late for a flight anymore. This was something else entirely. I was beginning to realize that the people around me weren't just looking at me with curiosity now. No, it was something different, something colder. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was there. It was like a wave of judgment rolling over me. "Is there a problem with my reservation?" I asked again, trying to hold on to my composure. But this time, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The man who had been standing by the door was now walking toward us. He didn't look friendly. Not at all. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Mr. Trump," the flight attendant said, her voice firm and unmoving. "Please step aside." I stared at her. There was no mistaking it now. She wasn't asking me to leave. She was telling me. And as I looked around, I realized the people standing behind me were watching the whole thing. The air seemed to shift again, heavier, colder, almost like they were waiting for something. The man who had been standing near the door finally approached me, standing just inches away. His eyes were cold, like he was ready to pounce. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with this expression like he was daring me to speak. "Are you telling me I can't board this flight?" I asked, my voice now cutting through the thick tension in the room. The man finally spoke. "That's exactly what we're telling you, Mr. Trump. We don't want you on this flight." I felt my heart race. What was going on? I've never been treated like this before. I've dealt with protests, with controversies, but this was something new, something personal. The crowd behind me shifted, muttering among themselves. I could hear the whispers. People were picking sides. Some were nodding in agreement with the flight attendant. Some were shaking their heads, confused by what was happening. I was taken aback. This wasn't just about a flight. This wasn't about me being late or even about security. This was something bigger. It felt like a protest, like they had something against me personally. Is this your decision? I asked the flight attendant. Or is this the airline's decision? She didn't answer. She just looked at me, that same cold stare. The air around me seemed to thicken, and the whispers were getting louder. Some people were pointing at me now, making it clear they were on the side of the flight attendant. Others were recording the whole situation. I could feel the cameras on me, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I'm not leaving, I said, standing my ground. I wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. The flight attendant didn't say anything more. She simply crossed her arms and waited, as if daring me to continue. The security guard stepped forward, his hand subtly resting on his radio. I could see the muscles in his arms tense, ready to take action if needed. But I wasn't backing down. I turned toward the boarding area, trying to look calm, trying to figure out how to handle this. But the reality was, this wasn't something I could fix with money or power. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I was sure of one thing. I wasn't leaving without an answer. Then, from behind me, a voice interrupted the tension. "Mr. Trump, please." I turned to see a new face, someone who wasn't part of the confrontation, but had stepped forward from the crowd. The man was dressed in a suit, his voice low but urgent. "We can work something out. Please, let's talk." Before I could respond, the flight attendant raised her hand, signaling to the security guard. He took a step forward. The tension in the room was palpable. The man in the suit stood there, waiting for me to make a decision. What was happening? What was this about? And more importantly, who had the power here? I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The seconds stretched out like hours as I stood there, not sure what to do. The man in the suit was standing next to me now, his eyes flicking from me to the flight attendant. The security guard was still hovering nearby, his stance stiff, waiting for me to make a move. It felt like I was trapped in a room with no way out, no way to make this go away. "Mr. Trump," the man in the suit said again, his voice calm but firm. "Let's just take a step back here. I'm sure we can work something out." I wasn't sure what he meant by working something out. The way the flight attendant had spoken to me, like I wasn't even a person, like I was some sort of villain, it made my blood boil. How could someone treat me this way? I'm Donald Trump. I've been to the top and back, and I've dealt with more difficult situations than this. So why did this one feel different? Why was the room getting smaller, the walls closing in? "I don't need to work something out," I said, my voice firm, trying to regain control of the situation. "I've got a flight to catch. I paid for my seat, and I'm going to get on that plane." The man in the suit glanced at the flight attendant and then back at me. He seemed to hesitate, like he didn't want to make the situation worse, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when I'd come this far. "Mr. Trump," the flight attendant said coldly, cutting through the tension. "You're not getting on this flight." Her words echoed in the small space between us. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, my hands trembling slightly. This wasn't just about getting on a plane anymore. This was personal. This was about respect, something I wasn't getting. I wasn't going to let her win. I couldn't. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but I'm not walking away from this gate without getting on my plane," I said, trying to make my voice steady. "You don't get to treat me like this." She didn't react, not even a flinch. She just stood there, staring at me. The crowd behind me was getting larger now, their eyes on me. I could feel the weight of their attention, but that only made me more determined. People were already recording, whispering among themselves. The cameras were out. The whole thing felt like a spectacle, like some kind of show, and I hated it. "Sir," the man in the suit interjected, stepping closer. "You have to understand. This isn't about you personally. This is just the airline's policy." "Policy?" I snapped, turning to face him. "This is about one woman deciding that she doesn't like me and using her position to make me look like a fool." The man looked uncomfortable, glancing at the flight attendant before speaking again. "I don't want to escalate things any further. Let's just step outside for a moment and talk." I could feel my patience wearing thin. There was no way I was backing down, not when I was being treated like this. I wasn't about to let anyone make me feel small, especially not in front of all these people. I'd worked too hard to get where I was. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized I wasn't in control of the situation anymore. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, shaking my head. I'm not leaving without getting on this flight. The flight attendant crossed her arms and gave me a pointed look. You don't belong here, and you're not going to intimidate me into changing my mind. That was it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not, I don't want you here. Not, you can't get on this flight. No, she said, you don't belong here. Like I was some kind of outsider and intruder. My fists clenched at my sides. The words stung, but I refused to let her see it. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice rising, trying to keep the situation under control. You're just going to stand here and refuse to let me on the plane? The security guard finally stepped forward. Mr. Trump, I think it's best if you leave the gate area, he said, his voice flat and businesslike. I turned to face him. I'm not leaving. Not until I'm on that plane. You can tell me I'm not welcome all you want, but that doesn't change the fact that I paid for this flight. The security guard hesitated. His eyes flicked to the man in the suit, who shook his head, a silent signal to him that this wasn't the direction they wanted to go. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I was done playing nice. I'm not going anywhere. I repeated, my jaw set. Either you let me on the plane, or we're going to have a bigger problem. I could feel the crowd around me growing more tense, the eyes of everyone watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Some were filming, others whispered, but the tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. The flight attendant's face was stone, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that I couldn't quite read. Anger? Regret? I wasn't sure, but it didn't matter. She wasn't going to get the best of me. I wasn't going to let it happen. I don't want to have to ask you again, Mr. Trump, she said, her voice hard now. Step aside. Now. The words hung in the air. The final warning. But I wasn't backing down. I'm not leaving, I said again, my voice sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. The words felt like a declaration, like I was staking my ground. There was no turning back now. The flight attendant didn't speak. Instead, she just took a step back, her eyes never leaving mine. The security guard stood still, waiting for some sort of sign from her. The man in the suit looked like he was about to say something, but nothing came out. The situation had reached a standstill. Neither side was willing to give in. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the longer I stood there, the more the situation was slipping away from me. The crowd was watching, and I knew that this was bigger than just me being denied a seat on a plane. This was about something else, something I couldn't quite grasp. I glanced at the flight attendant, trying to read her, trying to figure out what she wanted. But she wouldn't let me. Her face was impassive, unreadable. This wasn't just a refusal to let me board. This was something personal. I could feel it in the air. And then, as the seconds stretched on, I knew something had changed. Something was happening, and I wasn't sure I could stop it. The tension in the room was so thick, you could almost taste it. I could feel the eyes of everyone on me, the judgmental stares, the whispers, the phone cameras clicking and whirring. It felt like the whole world was watching. But all I wanted was to get on the plane. I wasn't asking for a fight. I wasn't asking for drama. I just wanted to board my flight, sit in my seat, and be left alone. But now it felt like I was stuck in a game I didn't understand. The flight attendant, standing there like some sort of gatekeeper, wasn't budging. The security guard hadn't moved either, just waiting for the next move. And that man in the suit, he kept glancing around, like he was waiting for something to happen, but no one was saying anything. Mr. Trump, please. Just leave, the flight attendant said again, but this time her voice had a tremor. Maybe she realized how deep she had gotten herself into. You're making this worse. But I wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not after everything that had already happened. She was trying to make me feel small, like I didn't belong here. And I wasn't going to let her win. I stepped closer to the counter, trying to close the space between us, but the man in the suit moved quickly to block me. Mr. Trump, please. We're just trying to keep the situation under control, he said, his voice a little too calm, like he didn't want to rock the boat. We don't need any more trouble. I'm not the one causing trouble. I snapped, my voice rising. She's the one refusing to let me on my plane. The man looked uncomfortable, glancing at the flight attendant, then at the security guard. They were all looking to each other, as if they were deciding what to do next. I could see the confusion in their eyes, but I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about me getting on my flight. I turned back to the flight attendant. You have no right to do this, I said, my tone demanding. You're denying me a service I've already paid for. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she just stood there, her expression unwavering. I could see the crowd behind me whispering to each other, some shaking their heads, others smiling like they'd just seen something they'd been waiting for. I hated how it felt, like they were all waiting for me to fail. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside of me, but I had to keep it together. I wasn't going to let this woman get under my skin. I wasn't going to let them turn this into some spectacle. This wasn't a movie. This was my life. That's when I decided to take things to the next level. If they wanted to fight, I'd give them one. I pulled out my phone. I needed help, and I needed it fast. This situation had gone beyond something I could solve on my own, and I knew exactly who I needed to call. I scrolled through my contacts and hit the number for my lawyer. He'd dealt with more than his fair share of public disputes, and I knew he would have the connections to get this sorted out quickly. It rang a few times before he picked up. His voice was groggy, like I had just woken him up. "Donald? What's going on?" he asked, sounding half asleep. "Get up. I need you to make some calls," I said, keeping my voice low. I didn't want to attract any more attention. "I'm being denied boarding at the gate. I'm at the airport, and they're refusing to let me on the plane." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean they're refusing? Did you do something? What happened?" I could hear the disbelief in his voice. "It's not about what I did," I said, trying to keep my frustration in check. "They just don't want me on the flight. I don't know what the problem is, but they've got it out for me." Okay. I'll make some calls. Just stay put. Don't do anything until I get there." I hung up the phone and looked around. The people in the crowd were still watching, still filming. I could hear them talking, some voices louder than others, but it didn't matter. What mattered now was making sure I wasn't going to be pushed around. The man in the suit moved closer to me again. "Mr. Trump," he said quietly, like he was trying to calm me down. "You really don't want to escalate this." "Escalate?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "I'm not escalating anything. They're the ones making this difficult. All I'm asking is to be allowed on my flight." Why is that so hard for them to understand? He didn't have an answer. He just looked at the flight attendant, who was still standing behind the counter, her arms crossed. She hadn't said anything in a while, and it seemed like she wasn't planning to. "Mr. Trump, please," the man said again, his voice more insistent. "If you don't calm down, we're going to have to ask you to leave the gate area." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was the one being treated like this, and now they were threatening me with being kicked out of the airport. It felt unreal. "I'm not leaving," I said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere until I get what I paid for." The man in the suit sighed and shook his head. "Look, we don't want to make this a bigger issue than it already is. We're just doing our jobs here." "Then do your job and let me on the plane," I snapped. The flight attendant spoke up at last. "You're not getting on this flight," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. She wasn't even looking at me anymore, like she had already decided that I was the problem and nothing was going to change that. I looked at her, feeling my blood pressure rise. "Why?" I asked, the word coming out in a sharp burst. "Why am I being treated like this?" She didn't answer, just stared at me. The silence stretched on, making everything feel more intense. The crowd was waiting. The cameras were still rolling. But there was nothing I could do. My lawyer hadn't called back yet. The longer I stood there, the more helpless I felt. This wasn't something I could fix on my own. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the principle of it all. I couldn't let them make a fool of me, not in front of everyone. But I also couldn't stand here all day, fighting a battle I wasn't sure I could win. Suddenly, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out, hoping it was my lawyer. But when I looked at the screen, it wasn't him. It was a text from someone else. The message was short, but it hit me hard. "Don't back down. They're testing you. Hold your ground." I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart racing. The message didn't tell me what to do, but it was a reminder. I wasn't alone in this fight, and I wasn't going to let them push me around. I took a deep breath and looked up at the man in the suit. "I'm not going anywhere," I said again, my voice steady now. I wasn't leaving this gate, not until I had what I came for. But then, the unexpected happened. The flight attendant stepped forward. "You're causing a scene," she said quietly, "and you're making everyone uncomfortable." I couldn't believe it. She was making me the bad guy now. But I wasn't about to let that slide. Not when I was being treated like this. "I'm not the one causing a scene," I said, my voice cold now. "You're the one refusing to let me on the plane." She didn't respond, but the man in the suit was looking at her, waiting for some kind of signal. I could see the tension building between them. This was bigger than just a disagreement over a flight. There was something else going on, something I still couldn't figure out. I wasn't going to walk away. And that's when the door to the gate opened, and a figure stepped through, someone who could change everything. The tension in the air was suffocating, like it had wrapped itself around my chest and wouldn't let go. The flight attendant was still standing there, looking at me like I was the cause of every problem in the world. The man in the suit had stepped back, his expression tight, like he wasn't sure if he should intervene anymore. The security guard was just waiting for one of us to make the next move, and the crowd was still buzzing, their eyes darting between me and the scene unfolding. But it was clear this wasn't just about a disagreement over a seat anymore. This was about something bigger, something I wasn't quite ready to face. Every minute that ticked by made me feel more helpless, more trapped in a situation I couldn't control. I could feel my phone vibrating again in my pocket, but I didn't check it. I couldn't afford to be distracted right now. This was it. This was the moment I had to stand my ground. But how? I couldn't even tell where the fight was coming from, let alone how to fight it. That's when I saw him. I didn't recognize him at first. He wasn't someone I knew, but he was walking toward me with purpose. His face was calm, but there was something in his eyes, a knowing, like he had been watching the whole thing unfold and had figured out the next move before anyone else. "Mr. Trump," he said, his voice smooth but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is everything all right here?" The crowd seemed to pause for a second. There was a brief moment of confusion, like no one was sure whether he was part of the staff or another passenger. But then the flight attendant turned her head and stiffened when she saw him. The man in the suit did the same. It was like they were both recognizing something I wasn't seeing. I turned to face him, my eyes narrowing. He wasn't a tall guy, maybe around average height. He wore a navy blue jacket with a white shirt underneath, but there was nothing too special about him, except for the way he carried himself. There was an air of confidence about him, the kind of person who walks into a room and immediately commands attention, without having to say much. "Who are you?" I asked, genuinely curious. Who was this guy, and why was he so interested in what was happening? He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked directly at the flight attendant, then at the man in the suit. His expression was calm, but his eyes were hard, focused. It was like he was analyzing the situation, picking it apart piece by piece. "I'm just a concerned citizen," he finally said, his voice measured. "And it looks like things are getting out of hand here. Mr. Trump just wants to get on his flight, and, as I see it, there's no reason why that shouldn't happen." His words hung in the air like a challenge. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just some random person. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't on anyone's side. He was here to change the game. The flight attendant's eyes flicked to him, and I could tell she wasn't happy about his sudden appearance. She opened her mouth to say something, but he cut her off before she could speak. "I'm sorry, but you can't keep him here any longer," he said, his voice firm. "You've already caused a scene, and now it's time for everyone to move on. Mr. Trump deserves to board this flight, just like anyone else. You made your point. Let's end this." I saw the flight attendant's jaw tighten, and for a second, I thought she might snap at him. But instead, she just crossed her arms and looked away, as if she wasn't going to engage with him any longer. The man in the suit seemed to be struggling internally, torn between the new arrival and his previous commitment to keeping the situation under control. I looked at the stranger in front of me. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he handled the situation, that made me feel heard. For the first time in this entire ordeal, someone was standing up for me without hesitation. He didn't seem to care about who I was or what I represented. He was just speaking up for what was right. "Who sent you?" I asked, finally finding my voice. "Are you with the airline? Are you a lawyer or something?" He gave me a slight smile, almost like he was enjoying the mystery of it all. "I'm no lawyer," he said, his tone calm and assured. "But I have a way of making things right." That didn't exactly answer my question, but I didn't care. The fact was, I needed him right now. I needed someone who wasn't afraid to take a stand, someone who wasn't intimidated by the situation. And for whatever reason, this man had decided to step in. The security guard, who had been standing in the back with his arms crossed, took a step forward. His face was unreadable, but I could tell he was trying to assess whether this was going to turn into something worse. His hand was hovering near his radio, ready to call for backup if necessary. But the stranger in front of me didn't flinch. He was completely composed, never wavering in his stance. And for a moment, it felt like the entire room had shifted. The balance had tipped, and suddenly, I wasn't the one standing alone anymore. "Mr. Trump," the stranger continued, his voice steady, "I think it's time to move this along. You're a paying customer. You follow the rules, and you're being unfairly treated. I'm here to make sure you get what's rightfully yours." The man in the suit hesitated for a moment, then spoke up, his voice tense. "This isn't as simple as you think. There are policies and protocols in place, and—" The stranger raised his hand, cutting him off. "I'm well aware of the policies, but I'm also aware of fairness. And this isn't it." There was a long silence after that. The flight attendant didn't say anything, but she looked back and forth between the two men. I could tell she was trying to figure out what her next move should be, but she was running out of options. She didn't have backup. The crowd was still watching, and she couldn't just throw me off the flight now. The stranger's presence was like a force field that had been thrown up between me and the airline staff, and for the first time since this whole ordeal had started, I felt like I had a chance. "Mr. Trump," the stranger said, looking at me with a nod. "Go ahead. Board the plane. You've been patient long enough." I looked at him, still unsure of who he was or why he was helping me, but the fact was I didn't care. I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I turned toward the gate, my heart pounding in my chest, as the crowd began to murmur and shift. They were all waiting, but I had no time for their opinions now. I took a step toward the gate, my legs heavy, but I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't going to turn around. The flight attendant said nothing as I walked past her, and the man in the suit didn't stop me either. But as I reached the door, I could hear the stranger speak again. "You're lucky, you know," he said quietly. "People like you don't always get the help they need. But today's your day." I didn't turn around to respond. I didn't have to. His words lingered in the air behind me as I stepped onto the plane, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a little less alone. The door closed behind me, and I finally allowed myself to take a deep breath. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time in what felt like forever, But as I settled into my seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stepped into something much bigger than a simple boarding dispute. This stranger, whoever he was, had helped me today, but I couldn't help but wonder if he was playing his own game, one that I hadn't fully understood yet. I wasn't sure if I was safe, if I could trust him. But one thing was certain. He was the ally I never saw coming. And now, I was wondering if I was about to find out why. The seatbelt sign above blinked off, signaling that we could now move around the cabin. I sat back, trying to let the pressure of the situation melt away. But as the plane soared into the sky, my thoughts were racing. Everything had happened so fast. I had just been on the edge of being thrown off the flight, and now I was sitting in a first-class seat, heading toward my destination. What had changed? How did I go from the verge of disaster to sitting comfortably? I couldn't stop thinking about the stranger. Who was he? What did he want? He'd stepped in just when things seemed at their worst, and without him, I'd still be stuck in that airport, fighting a losing battle. But his words lingered with me. People like you don't always get the help they need. Was he suggesting that I was lucky, or was there something more behind it? Was I really as helpless as he made it sound? As I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling gnawing at me, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, startled, only to find a flight attendant standing behind me. It was the same one from earlier, the one who had refused to let me board the plane. Her expression had softened, but there was still a tension in her eyes. "Mr. Trump," she said in a quiet voice, "I need to speak with you for a moment. It's about what happened before." I didn't know what to expect. Maybe she was going to apologize for the whole mess, or maybe she was about to give me a piece of her mind. Either way, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. But I could tell by the way she was looking at me that something was off. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice laced with caution. She nodded, but there was a flicker of hesitation. "Can you come with me?" "It's about the man who helped you earlier." I froze. The man who had helped me. The stranger. This was exactly what I had been waiting for. Some kind of explanation. I followed her to the back of the plane, away from the other passengers, where it was quieter. The door to the galley was closed, and she motioned for me to step inside. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice low and urgent. "You have no idea who you were just helped by." I raised an eyebrow, my mind spinning. "What do you mean? Who was he?" She looked around nervously, as if making sure no one else could hear her. "His name is Jack Walker. He's not just any regular passenger, not like you or me." I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. "What do you mean by that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I had no idea where this was going, but I could tell it wasn't going to be good. "Jack Walker," she continued, "is a fixer, a professional. He gets involved in things that the public doesn't know about. You could say he works in the shadows, making problems disappear. And he doesn't do it for free." I blinked, not quite sure what I was hearing. "A fixer? You mean like a lawyer or something?" She shook her head quickly. "No, not a lawyer. Not exactly. He's a problem solver, Mr. Trump. But he's not doing it out of the kindness of his heart. There's always a price." The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. What I just stepped into. I had thought he was just some random guy who happened to help me, but now it seemed like I had been caught up in something much bigger. "You're saying that guy was a hired help? A mercenary?" I asked, the confusion mixing with a sense of dread. The flight attendant nodded slowly. "I don't know all the details, but he's worked for some very powerful people. People who don't take no for an answer. If you're wondering why he stepped in to help you, it's because it's part of something bigger." I could feel my heart racing, my mind spinning. "Bigger? What do you mean by that? What does he want with me?" She glanced around once more, lowering her voice even further. "That's the thing, Mr. Trump. He doesn't do favors unless there's something in it for him. He saw you as an opportunity, and he took it." I swallowed hard, trying to process everything she was telling me. I didn't know whether to be angry or terrified. How had I ended up here? Was I just another pawn in someone else's game? What kind of opportunity? I asked, my voice tight. She hesitated before speaking again. "I'm not sure, but I do know this. Jack doesn't step in for just anyone. He's here because of something bigger than the incident at the gate. Something that involves you." I felt a knot form in my stomach. What could I possibly have to do with any of this? I was just trying to catch my flight. "What do you mean, something that involves me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" She sighed and looked down at the floor for a moment before speaking again. "Mr. Trump, you've made a lot of enemies in your time, but you've also made a lot of allies, some of them you don't even know about. People who owe you favors, people who want to see you succeed. And Jack, he's connected to them. He's not working alone, and you're not just a random target. You're a player in a game, whether you realize it or not." My mind was spinning faster now. What game was she talking about? I had never asked for any of this. I was just trying to get to my destination. But as I looked at the flight attendant, her eyes filled with something like pity, I knew that the answers I was seeking wouldn't come easily. I wasn't sure I was ready to face whatever truth was coming next, but I couldn't walk away from it either. "Are you telling me I'm involved in something I don't even understand?" I asked, trying to make sense of it all. She nodded slowly. "Yes, and that's why you need to be careful, Mr. Trump. Jack Walker doesn't play by the same rules as everyone else. And now that he's involved with you, your life just got a lot more complicated." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. I was just trying to get on a plane, but now it seemed like I'd been swept into a world I couldn't escape. I needed answers, but the more I learned, the more questions I had. Who was Jack Walker really working for? What game was I now a part of? And, more importantly, what was he expecting from me? As the plane continued to climb higher into the sky, I couldn't help but wonder what was waiting for me on the other side. I had no idea what kind of storm I just stepped into, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The plane had reached its cruising altitude, and I felt the gentle hum of the engines beneath my feet. The flight attendant had just left, but her words still echoed in my mind. Everything she said was a puzzle piece I couldn't quite fit together. It was as if I had walked into a world where the rules were different, where people like me were pawns in some larger game. And now that Jack Walker had entered the picture, everything felt uncertain. The sense of unease I tried to push aside crept back into my thoughts, like an unwanted shadow that refused to leave. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, trying to push the noise away. There had to be an explanation for all of this, some way to make sense of the chaos that was unfolding. But as much as I wanted to understand, the truth seemed more elusive with every passing minute. Suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. My eyes snapped open, and I turned to see the flight attendant again. This time, her expression was serious, even grim. "Mr. Trump," she said quietly, glancing down the aisle to make sure no one was watching. "There's someone who wants to talk to you." My heart skipped a beat. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She looked around one more time, her eyes darting nervously. "It's Jack. He wants to meet you in the galley." I swallowed hard. What did he want now? Hadn't I already been through enough today? But I didn't have much choice. I stood up, feeling the weight of the moment press on my chest. This wasn't just any conversation. It felt like the beginning of something much bigger, something I couldn't control. I followed the flight attendant to the back of the plane. The galley was dimly lit, and the air felt heavy with tension. As I stepped inside, I saw Jack Walker standing there, leaning against the counter. He wasn't looking at me, but instead, he was staring out the small window that framed the vast, cloud-covered sky. He turned slowly when he heard me approach. There was a calmness in his eyes, but it wasn't the kind of calm you get from peace. It was the kind of calm that comes from knowing things others don't. "You came," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Good. I knew you would." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I had so many questions, but none of them seemed to matter right now. I was too tired, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "I didn't ask for this," I finally said. "I didn't ask for you to get involved in my life. I don't even know what you want from me." Jack's expression softened for a moment. I know this isn't what you wanted. But sometimes, Mr. Trump, things don't work the way we want them to. Sometimes we get caught up in something bigger than ourselves. And when that happens, there's only one thing we can do." I crossed my arms, trying to keep my emotions in check. "And what's that?" He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine. "You have to make a choice. A decision that will affect everything. It's not going to be easy, but it's the only way forward." I felt a chill run down my spine. A decision? What kind of decision could he be talking about? What kind of choice could change everything? Before I could ask, Jack continued. "The people I work for, they're watching you. They've been watching you for a long time. You're in the spotlight, whether you like it or not. And now that I've gotten involved, things are about to get much more complicated for you." I felt a knot form in my stomach. The idea that people have been watching me, following me, it made my skin crawl. But I couldn't deny it. Everything that had happened, everything that was happening now, seemed to be part of some larger plan, one that I didn't fully understand. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice tense. "What do I have to decide?" Jack paused for a long moment, his eyes never leaving mine. "There's someone who's been trying to get to you. Someone who sees you as a means to an end. They want something from you, something that only you can give them. And I've been sent to make sure that doesn't happen." I took a step back, feeling the weight of his words. "Who? Who's trying to get to me?" Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing against mine for just a second. "Read it," he said quietly. "The truth is in there. But be careful. Once you open it, there's no turning back." I hesitated for a moment, looking at the envelope in my hands. It felt cold, heavier than it should have been. Slowly, I opened it, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled out the contents. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded in half. I unfolded it and read the words written in a sharp, clean handwriting. "Underscore, we know who you are. We know what you've done. And now, we're coming for you. If you want to survive, you'll make the right choice. Underscore." The words sent a jolt through me. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning, a promise. Whoever these people were, they were serious. And the truth of what was at stake began to sink in. I wasn't just caught up in something I didn't understand. I was part of a much bigger picture, one that involved more than just my own life. "What does this mean?" I asked, looking up at Jack. He didn't answer right away. He was studying me, his eyes calculating, weighing my every move. "It means you have a choice to make. You can ignore it, pretend it doesn't matter. Or you could take action. You can step up and do what's necessary." I felt the pressure mounting. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about some silly plane incident or an argument with a flight attendant. It was about something far more dangerous, something I didn't fully comprehend. What happens if I don't make the right choice? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jack's eyes darkened. You don't want to find out. The silence that followed felt suffocating. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what the right choice was. I didn't know if there even was a right choice. But what I did know was that I had no choice but to make one. I looked back down at the note in my hand, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Everything I had worked for, everything I had done, it could all unravel because of this one decision. And it wasn't just my life that was on the line. It was everyone I cared about, everyone who was close to me. The decision I had to make wasn't just about survival. It was about loyalty. It was about trust. It was about who I was willing to sacrifice to protect everything I had fought for. Jack was still watching me, his gaze unblinking. You have to decide now. Time is running out. I felt a cold sweat forming on my brow. The pressure was overwhelming, suffocating. But I knew that whatever I chose, nothing would ever be the same again. This was it, the choice that would change everything. I stared at the note in my hands, feeling the weight of it pressing down on me. It was a simple message, a threat, but it carried more power than any words had a right to. I could hear Jack's voice in my head. You have to decide now. Time is running out. My mind raced, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely powerless. The plane around me felt like it was closing in, the hum of the engines now a deafening roar in my ears. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't. There was nowhere to hide. Not now. Not anymore. Not from what was coming. I glanced up at Jack. He was still standing by the galley, calm as ever, waiting for me to make up my mind. It was as if he knew exactly what I was going through, like he had seen this all before and was just waiting for me to catch up. I didn't know if that made me feel worse or better. This is all too much, I said, the words escaping me before I could stop them. I don't know what you want from me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Jack didn't move. He didn't even flinch. I told you, he said quietly. You can ignore it. But ignoring it means they win. And you lose. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout at him, to ask him why he had to get involved in my life, why he couldn't just leave me alone. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The longer I ignored it, the more I let these people, whoever they were, take control. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing back and forth. What could I do? What could I even possibly do? I had been thrust into this situation with no warning, no way to prepare, and now I had to make a decision that could ruin everything. The flight attendant appeared in the doorway of the galley, her eyes darting nervously from Jack to me. Mr. Trump, she said softly, her voice shaking. There's someone who wants to speak with you. I froze. Another person? Who could it be? My stomach dropped at the thought of more people trying to pull me into whatever nightmare was unfolding. I looked at Jack, silently asking for permission. He gave a slight nod. All right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Let's see who else is involved in this mess. The flight attendant led me to a small, quiet compartment at the front of the plane. As I stepped inside, my heart skipped a beat. There, sitting at one of the seats, was a man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a dark suit, his face obscured by the dim light. But something about him felt familiar. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew he wasn't here by accident. Mr. Trump, the man said, his voice deep and calm. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was racing. Who was this man? Why was he on my plane? And why was he speaking to me like we had met before? Do you know why I'm here? The man continued, his eyes never leaving mine. I shook my head slowly, trying to keep my composure. No, I have no idea. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, calculated. I'm here to make sure you understand the gravity of your situation. You think you have time. You think you can make your choice later. But you don't have time. And the choice you make will be the last one you ever get to make. My stomach twisted. What was this guy talking about? What kind of game was he playing? He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The people we work for, they've been watching you for a long time. Longer than you know. And now, they want something from you. Something only you can give them. I stepped back, my heart racing. I don't know what you're talking about, I I said, trying to sound confident. I don't have anything to give. The man chuckled softly, almost pityingly. You've already given them what they wanted, Mr. Trump. You just don't know it yet. I felt a chill run through me. I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to know what he was about to say. But I had no choice. I had to know. I had to understand. He stood up, taking a step closer. It's not just about money or power. It's about something much bigger. Something that's been set in motion for years. And you, Mr. Trump, you're the key. The key? To what? What kind of twisted game had I been pulled into? I'm not involved in anything like that, I said, my voice shaking. I don't know who you are or who you work for, but I'm not playing your game. The man's smile faded, and his gaze grew colder. You don't have a choice. You never did. I didn't have time to respond. The plane jolted, throwing me off balance. I grabbed the seat next to me to steady myself, but the feeling of unease was growing stronger. Something was happening. Something big. The lights in the cabin flickered, and the entire plane seemed to shudder. Panic spread quickly among the passengers. The flight attendants rushed down the aisles, trying to calm everyone down, but it was clear that something was wrong. What's happening? I asked, turning back to the man in the suit. But he was already gone, disappearing into the chaos. I didn't have time to think. The cabin was now in full-blown panic. People were screaming, asking what was going on, but there was no answer. The only thing I could hear was the constant, pounding noise of the plane's engines. Then the lights went out completely. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to process what had just happened. What was going on? Where was everyone? I couldn't see anything in the dark, and the only sounds I could hear were the frantic breathing of the passengers around me and the faint hum of the engines. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I heard a voice. Mr. Trump, a voice said softly. It was Jack's voice, but it sounded different. It was more urgent, more desperate. I turned to face him, my mind spinning. What's happening? What's going on? Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the plane. You need to listen to me, he said, his voice tight with panic. You need to make your decision now. There's no time left. I felt a rush of fear flood through me. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. The moment where my life, everything I had worked for, would be decided. The weight of it pressed down on me, and I felt like I was suffocating. I can't, I said, my voice cracking. I don't know what to do. Jack looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. You don't have a choice. You never did. The final straw had been pulled. I stopped cold. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The private jet had been sabotaged. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to process what I had just heard. The airport buzzed around me, people moving, voices overlapping, but everything felt distant, like I was underwater. My heart pounded, my mind raced. I turned to the man who had delivered the news, my voice low but firm. What do you mean, sabotage? His expression was tight, serious. He glanced around before leaning in. Someone tampered with the engine. Not enough to cause an accident, but enough to delay takeoff. The pilot caught it before boarding. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. Someone didn't just want to stop me from flying. They wanted me to know they could. I looked past him back toward the gate. The flight attendant was gone, but her presence still lingered. The way she had stared me down, so sure of herself. Had she known about this? Was she part of it? I shook my head. No, this was bigger than her. The man lowered his voice even more. Mr. Trump, I don't think it's safe for you here. We should leave the airport. Leave? That word left a bitter taste in my mouth. I wasn't someone who just walked away. I built towers, casinos, brands. I had faced the toughest negotiators in the world. And now I was being told to leave an airport like some nobody? No, that wasn't happening. But I wasn't stupid either. I knew when to push forward and when to step back. This wasn't a fight I could win right here, not in front of cameras, not with security watching my every move. I nodded. Fine, but I'm not going home. Give me somewhere private. We moved quickly, cutting through the airport. People still stared, whispers following me like shadows. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, but I kept my head up. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. As we stepped outside, a black SUV pulled up. The driver barely had time to put it in park before the man opened the door and ushered me in. The moment I was inside, the car pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the night. Inside, I let out a breath, staring out the window as the airport lights faded behind us. The man across from me adjusted his tie. "We're taking you to a secure location. No one will know where you are." I turned to him. "And then what?" He hesitated. "Then we figure out who did this." I looked back out the window, my hands gripping the seat. This wasn't over. Not even close. Thank you for listening to another exciting story from VIP Vault. If you have enjoyed listening to this story, check out our videos here.